Thank you, Representative McDonald. So we'll go ahead and bring the meeting to order. Committee, thank you for being here today. Staff, thank you also so much for being here. And conferees, thank you for being here patiently. Do I need to speak a little louder? I don't hear that very often, but but anyway, yeah, thanks everybody for being here. So today I want to make it clear, we're going to work one bill, 250, Senate Bill 250. Tomorrow, we will work House Bill 2219, Senate Bill 29, and Senate Bill 67. So I think most of you have already got your amendments in for those after the hearing on Friday. But so that's what we'll do tomorrow. Representative Gardner. Yeah. House Bill 2219, Senate Bill 29, and Senate Bill 67. Committee, any more questions? I stand corrected on that. Scratch off 2219. It's 2368. It's the AA bill. Representative Orpezzo.
So we're having a hearing then tomorrow on the...
We have heard that bill. We're working
we did.
it.
Okay.
We heard it way back. A month ago, I think on the 17th of February or something like that. So we have heard that. So we will be working 2368, Senate Bill 67, and Senate Bill 29. I have too many bills, numbers in my head. Yeah. Okay, any questions now? 2368. Okay, if we're all clear on that, thank you for straightening me out, Carly. Okay, with that, we will begin working Senate Bill 250. Committee discussions. Representative Orpezzo. Orpezzo.
Yes, thank you. So when I first read this bill, I really didn't understand what the goal of it was. And then after I reflected after our hearing and after several questions that were asked by representatives in this committee, it brought me to really contemplate if this is a good bill that we should be rushing through. And I have a couple of points to make about that. I'd like to bring up some historical background on how cells and maybe potentially DNA collected from Kansans might be used for future profits, which to me the bill does not definitely state that will not happen from that standpoint. And so let me tell you just a quick little story. So there was a woman who was diagnosed with cervical cancer in the 50s. Her name was Henrietta Lacks. She had cervical cancer. The Johns Hopkins hospital in which she visited took her cells, diagnosis, but then after that found out that her cells were basically immortal. So they lasted a lot longer than other cells that are normally used. And they're still used to this day, decades and decades later, and they're called the HeLa cells. So in stating that, this bill does have a consent. However, in stating that, the bill does have a consent, and the Board of Healing Arts did bring up some finer points of that consent of how the estates and those types of things could be held liable for payment if the patient perished during treatment. But then at the same point, this bill does not bring up any facts like if they should happen to find some wonderful new potential use of these DNA cells that they collect from potential Kansans, how that would be consented for, or how that would be used going forward. Would there be recognition? Would there be some type of a financial gain by the family? What does that look like? Is that appropriate to be done? It doesn't say it can't be done. It doesn't say it will be done, but at the same time, it's very vague. So those are my concerns in regards to that. My additional concern when hearing this bill is we didn't hear from any hospitals within the state of Kansas. We didn't hear from any academics or physicians within the state of Kansas like, hey, this is something I'm really into. I really want to do this. This would be great for our state. I have a special interest in this. So there's a lot of those types of things that were not addressed and we did not hear from across our state. In addition to saying that, I would hate for this bill, if it should get out of committee and pass forward on the floor, to then have somebody in the state of Kansas potentially pressure or ask for providers in the state to do certain things that they did not feel most comfortable with or not felt like they had the best educational background with. Now, we do have trials in the state of Kansas, and there are things that are going on from phase 1, 2, and 3, which is a slow uptake, and I do understand that is a slow process, but all for a reason. As we have seen in the past, there have been ethical issues. We don't want to put certain populations at risk. We want to make sure everybody understands what they're doing and what they're consenting for, and to make sure that we're not releasing or having something that's approved into the state or into the general population that could be ultimately harmful. And there are a lot of things that we find that unfortunately have some side effects that are not initially seen in initial trials. So in stating that, I just felt very compelled to make these statements because in addition, when questions were asked, they could not be answered as well. So in summary, I just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. It feels like this is a rushed process for me, at least. I don't know about anybody else. But that are we doing something because it's good? Or are we doing something because a company has asked us to fast track a process for certain populations? In addition to that, I happened to sit on the insurance committee last year as a substitute for one committee day only, and then the session ended. We were asking, our people had brought forward a couple of diagnoses that weren't covered by insurance in the state of Kansas, and there were 68 Kansans. And they were asking for this to be covered. It was PANS and PANDAS. It's something that Representative Epley had brought forward every year he had been here. Unfortunately, he was never able to pass. But yet that was denied. And that's been known to be treatment for these very special populations. However, it wasn't passed and it wasn't even worked in committee that one day. So I think there are other potential priorities that we should have instead of just saying it's okay for sick people who are looking for a cure, who are looking for answers, who are looking for something, and then not knowing the full consequences of how their DNA may be potentially used in the future. And I appreciate everybody listening to my comments, and I thank you for that. Unfortunately, I won't be able to support the bill.
Very good. Thank you for that. Committee, further discussion. Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say I echo pretty much everything the representative just said. I also have some trepidations about this bill. I think probably intentions are good, but when you have desperate people who are facing potential death, they're very, very vulnerable. And when you're talking about huge amounts of money for treatments that are unproven, I think we need to really be careful what we're doing. And from my way of thinking, if I had, I try to put myself in somebody's shoes, of course, and if I were facing a terminal illness, I think I would enroll in investigational trials that are already available and potentially no charge to the patient. This option of paying huge amounts of money, potentially with very limited liability on the people administering, and the treatments not being proven to work, gives me a lot of trepidation also. So I don't think, as the bill is written right now, I'd be able to support either. Thank you.
Committee further discussion. Representative Blex.
Thank you. Maybe a question for Representative Rice. If I'm assuming in a fairly simplistic way, if I get a death sentence, I'm going to ask number one, give me a second opinion. And if that one reaffirms that, I mean, I guess I would be willing to try something that has already been used. And are you saying that this would be something that they could, is a bill allowing the development of a process that may not have been proven or tried? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, these are treatments that are not proven safe and effective.
Okay, thank
not
you for
approved
that.
by the FDA and so forth. Yes.
Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't add anything to the discussion except that we do have a system for bringing these kinds of products to the market. And the system never works as fast as we would like, particularly if we're in a life-threatening situation. But the system has worked. It has brought us many, many innovative products. And I think we've got to stick with the system that we have and not be driven by desperation to deviate from that. So for that reason, I won't support this bill.
Representative Steens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I kind of struggle with this a little bit. On one hand, I hear what my previous colleagues are stating, but also I do know people that have done kind of what you might consider kind of extreme treatments. And I know we had our own personal experience with this with my spouse, and I would, you know, it was one of those things where the insurance company was denying some people, but we were lucky that they actually approved it for my spouse. So I get what everyone's saying here. I'm not necessarily opposed to having other testimony as well. And I agree we have a system, but then there's also cases where, you know, people are in these, like we just described, desperate, and sometimes also situations where they, and from my understanding, insurance does not have to pay for this, was my understanding of when we talked to the doctor there on Friday, or excuse me, was that Thursday or Friday? Sorry. Thank you, Friday. So, you know, if everybody is in agreement, we want to go back and get more testimony, I think that's fine. But I also recognize that there are people in very dire circumstances where, you know, especially if you're a mom with kids or just, you know, depending on your age sometimes too, those things can come into factor. And you're searching for kind of alternatives or what other treatments can be done. And sometimes I know over in Europe and those areas, and there's trials going on sometimes faster than we sometimes have them here, or vice versa. So anyway, those are just my comments. Thank you.
Representative Bueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will go back to some of my comments from Friday, and I think I referenced a family member who's going to go blind. And we know that there is, it's GNA, it's DNA sequencing. First off, KU is not interested in it. The physicians that this person have been to have sent this person to the University of Iowa's healthcare system, where there is a world-renowned ophthalmologist that's done research and trials on this. And through that, we found out last November that whether it's Finland or Denmark, that there are tests being done in Europe that are very, very promising. In fact, it goes one step further. This particular family member also has offspring and a granddaughter who has the same condition that could very well result in blindness. Now, what's being done in the United States is the FDA is not interested or slow tracking it through. So when we say right to try, and I asked that question last week, that's why I'm for this. Because Representative Gardner mentioned it, our system doesn't work fast enough in some cases. I realize that's for some safeguards. But when there's positive, promising trials in Europe or elsewhere, you ought to have the ability to do that. That's my my personal, and I you know, when it's someone close to you, it becomes personal. And then when you look for, here's a way possibly to change that, I think we ought to have the right and the ability to do that. And I get the FDA safeguards and everything else. But again, there is no interest because this particular affliction, it's such a small, minute portion of the population. There's not enough money to be made for it through our health care system in this country, but there are promising places elsewhere in the world, and you ought to have the ability to do that. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. Representative Droege.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really respect and recognize all the previous testimony, and I understand where it comes from, and that there is a system in place, but it is slow. And there's some question about efficacy of some of these treatments, but we can't approach and analyze every possible outcome or every possible problem, where if we have this opportunity for people to have, especially some of these like they're talking about in Europe, where there is something that shows a positive outcome, I think people should have the opportunity to do that. I realize that there's some big dollars involved sometimes, but that should be part of the discussion with the doctor and the patient. So I support this.
Thank you for that. Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to point out, so there isn't any confusion, people are not limited legally from joining these clinical trials. If there's some promising treatment, whether it's in Europe or elsewhere, they're perfectly fine to join a clinical trial. This is, from what I understand, this bill would allow treatments outside of the norm, outside of clinical trials. To me, there are many, many red flags when you're talking about not even doing a clinical trial that could help other people with the results. And so just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Representative Reeves.
I'm really concerned with and thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really concerned with the cost because he couldn't really give us a cost estimate. And I can understand why, because it's almost a boutique kind of treatment because it depends on your own DNA. I don't know who can afford it. And folks that are able to go to Europe now, obviously they're affording it. I don't know if you got to mortgage your house to do that. I'd probably do that if I had a child and I knew I can get him to some kind of a clinical trial in Europe somewhere. I'm just really uncomfortable with the cost and insurance companies are not going to pay for this. I have a hard time just, getting certain things paid for my own wife's treatment. And, she used to be on Blue Cross and now she's on Medicare, but it's still really difficult and it's difficult to manage the situations. And so I'm not in favor of it just simply because of the cost. I just think it's out of reach for the vast majority of people.
Very good. Thank you for that. Committee, further discussion. I have one, just Jenna or Carly. So is this tailored for a specific company?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jenna Moyer, Advisor Statutes Office. When I was drafting the bill, I was not made aware of any specific company or I think the word is manufacturer that this was directed towards.
I just, somewhere in what we heard about this, I heard testimony that it may be for a specific company, and I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't for a specific company. Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one of the conferees on video at our hearing was a specific company. I believe it was in Arizona, or I'm not sure. But they had a DNA type treatment that was individualized for each individual person. I was confused initially also. I thought this bill was covering the genetic code manipulation for specific people, but it's not. That's just, from what I understand, advisors can correct me, but it's more broad than that. And to the representatives talking about the DNA storage and so forth, I think that's probably, it exists, but it's not the bulk of the bill. This is treatments that are all kinds of modalities, and if I'm incorrect, I'd like the revisor to correct me, but I believe that's true. Thank you.
Representative Steens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I was just thinking about stem cells, right? Are we, because back in the day, stem cells were obviously, there was a lot of debate there. And, you know, we've used adult stem cells too. And like, I know people that went through some experimental treatment with that. Now, maybe that was more of a trial. So maybe I'm taking that out of context. But I do know of an individual here in Kansas that, I mean, she's actually in my own district, who went through a lot of experimentation and with different stem cells and T cells and all that, and was literally told that she would die. So she was in kind of a life-threatening things as well, because when I'm reading this, it does say that the physician has to document that, right? So is that correct? The physician has to say that. So, I mean, the physician, from my understanding, is involved in this process. So just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Representative Berquist, while Carly and Jen are looking up.
Okay, all
Very
right.
good.
Thank you. My concern is not for what we know about the bill, it's what we don't know. And it's what we don't know about what they would be doing with what kind of material, whether it's embryonic stem cells, whether it's T cells, whether it's experimental drugs, whether it's any other kind of substance that we don't know about. Because we're deciding to engage ourselves into something that and make a decision. We're not medical, most of us anyway, but because we also don't know what elements they're talking about and what procedures, but just a general license, I can't support this bill. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Representative Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question goes to Representative Bryce. Could you divide this? It's not clinical trials that we're talking about. This is what? Specifically?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I think that's part of the confusion I was trying to address before. What we have in place now are these clinical trials, and what I mean by that is there's an experimental drug, experimental therapy, maybe the genetic therapy like the conferee said, and there are regulated, standardized trials to see two things: if it's safe, if it's effective. There are different levels of trials. And there's a system. It not only provides usually free treatment for the patient, but it also provides information not only for the patient, but people in the future who are suffering the same thing, because they scientifically look at what works, what doesn't work. That's in place now. People can go get experimental therapy, stem cell therapy, et cetera, gene therapy, but through clinical trials currently. This doesn't take that away at all. This adds unregulated, I don't want to use the wrong term, but I'm thinking Wild Wild West. That's not appropriate. but it's in my way of thinking, it's taking people that are in a unbelievable, desperate situation, offering them something that's not known to work, and taking their entire estate. And that's just bluntly what I see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Bueller.
I think I would offer a counter to the Vice's comments. There are not clinical trials for everything. And I know that the example that I'm using, there are no clinical trials in the United States. There won't be any clinical trials in the United States for this and many other conditions because there's either not enough money in it or it's too far in the developmental process. That's the reality of it. So to say that you can participate in these clinical trials is not true. It's true in some cases. So I go back to, it's called the right to try. And so in the specific example I'm talking about, there are trials being done in Europe. And they do involve DNA and genetic testing. They're working on a database over there. There is zero interest in this country to help my family members, and there never will be. So this is a bill, when I asked the question on Friday, if it was your loved one, who was your wife who was going to go blind, or somebody else's, what would you do? Would you not want to have an option to do that? This is not, it's not, I think we're trying to read too much barbarism into this and unethical behavior. That's my point. My point is, when it's your loved one and you know that this country is not going to have a clinical trial, and the University of Iowa is who directed us there and said we would be happy to do these clinical trials if we could get them past the FDA, which there's no indication that they will. That's why this is important. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Blacks.
Thank you. I guess from my standpoint, it does not bypass a physician-patient relationship. They are sitting in a room giving an opinion, and all the time when we get sick, we don't have the knowledge, so we go to a physician and we assume that they're right. They may be, they may not be. And I guess from my standpoint, if I get that kind of a diagnosis, like I said earlier, it automatically is going to be a second opinion, and a physician is recommending what I will just call an experimental drug. Yeah, I may be vulnerable, but at the same token, there has been cases of that thing's working. And good example for the vets in the room, I use the paintball AIM-1 and I don't know the other name AIM-2. And AIM-2 is licensed as a cattle wormer in Europe, but it's not licensed in the United States. And I can use it for other purposes and it'll work, solve the worming. So, I'm leaning pretty strong to supporting this. Thank you.
Representative Rivas.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to offer a little different optic on this. I think we're kind of running down the medical analysis of this. I kind of stand where this is really a patient's right to make decisions. I've had patients over the years that have gone to Mexico and South America, Europe, and had medical and dental work done. And sometimes we had a real good friend that was did, cancer, and it was really not a good situation. And they went down to Mexico and really did the whole snake oil thing. Well, they had the patient right to go where they wanted to go. In America, we have guardrails. We've got malpractice insurance. We've got hospitals. We've got licensing boards. To me, patient right to treatment here, the mechanisms are in place. The challenge we have is technology is moving faster than the approval process. So I stand to support this bill. Let the patients make a decision. It's their body.
Committee further discussion. Representative Weichel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first I want to say I just really appreciate this debate. I think it's been good. I think back to other statements I've made about people's access to health care. And I have stated really firmly that I think health care is a basic human right. And as long as there's no implications for public health, I'm not sure we belong necessarily in that room. And so I think I do worry a lot about what this does in terms of what Representative Ruiz said about kind of some people are going to be able to afford it and some people are not, right? And that's not terribly different than the health system we have today around a lot of things. Certainly doesn't make it okay. But I think, I don't know, I'm conflicted because I totally hear what the healthcare providers are saying around not being clinical trials, but also that these are people, we're talking about people who are, have literally no other option left. So I think I'm inclined to support it.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really also appreciate this discussion. I personally have a little bit of an ethical qualm. I'm not sure how realistic informed consent is with such an evolving technology. We probably did need more medical professionals to come and educate us before making decisions on this. So I'm going to have to oppose the bill if we hear it today. Thank you.
Very good. Committee discussion. Representative Berquist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for another another swing. I appreciate the committee process. I appreciate the debate. I appreciate the opinions of people that are experts in the field of whatever we're talking about. And because of that, I still will be making a decision rather than having made one. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Committee, further discussion. Well, it could. I'm just concerned that an amendment may need to be written in the form of another bill if we're talking about potentially all the trouble that we've brought to light here on this. So I would postpone. We could pull this bill if there was, I suppose, enough. I really didn't see this much debate on it, quite frankly, and so that's why we're working it today. But if there were some amendments that could make some incremental corrections to this, I could pull this bill and work it another day, or I don't know. But I appreciate the debate. I think why don't we just vote it up or vote it down, and we'll deal with it at some point in time in the future. Representative Rivas.
If there's a possibility of an amendment, what would be the proposal? What would be the concept for the amendment? Or do you want to mention that?
Yeah, Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, I had 3 potential amendments that were related to Ms. Giles, who was with the Kansas Board of Healing Arts. She was a neutral testimony last week, and she mentioned 3 areas. One was on the informed consent. One was on attestation that there was no likelihood of living, and there was another on payment out of the patient's estate and whether the heirs would also be liable for patient costs racked up by the treatments. Thank you.
Representative Opeza.
My amendment would not have been offered by anybody who gave testimony, but I would like to offer amendment in regards to if there was some type of treatment that came out of offering up your DNA, that the person or person's estate, family members, be notified that there is potential of development of additional drugs or biologics or devices, that then the family or estate can be a part of and knowing about, because that is why I brought up Henrietta Lacks, because they did not get consent from her or her family or her relatives. And then from that point, those immortal cells have been used in lots and lots of development of treatments without even recognition and or any monetary value attached to that for her or her family or her descendants.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bryce, or Dr. Bryce, with your amendments, did one of them cover how the witness should be unaffiliated with the company? That's something she mentioned, and I didn't hear you say that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Representative, that's exactly right on one of the amendments, that there shouldn't be the same people offering the treatments that are witnessing, especially when a patient is in a dire situation like that. Thank you.
Representative Weichel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the Vice Chair for raising the testimony. That had slipped my mind that the Board of Healing Arts had offered those amendment ideas, and I think my support would be contingent upon us considering those amendments.
Committee, further discussion. Committee, I'm not a very big fan of conceptual amendments, so. Oh, you do have, oh, I thought, oh, I'm sorry. Well then, Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the revisor's office is very quick. They have my 3 amendments ready. No, I'm just kidding. The first, should I go over all 3? Yeah. Okay, the first is informed consent, deals with that, as Representative McDonald was saying. A witness to an informed consent in that situation should not be related in any way to the physician or to the product marketers, and that's what the amendment would be for consent.
Point of order.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you. Have we made a motion to work this bill yet?
Well, technically, we don't have to make a motion to work a bill.
I'm just trying to figure out what we're doing. That's
We're
all.
working the bill. I do need a motion for the amendment and a second.
I move my amendment.
Do I have a second? Representative Reese seconds it. Okay, now we're on the amendment.
I believe this is actually a different amendment than I described. I can go over this. I can go over this amendment. This is, please, should I speak?
We're good.
Okay.
So, Representative, would you care to explain your amendment?
Yes, I'm sorry. It was the wrong amendment. This is the attestation that concurs that all available treatments are unlikely to prolong life and the patient is basically going to die soon. As currently written, the patient has to concur or have a, I guess you would say, legal representation that these facts are true. However, a patient in general does not have the medical scientific knowledge to effectively concur. And what the bill initially was asking them to concur on is actually covered in the informed consent. So I would have the attestation amendment. If another witness is needed, it should be in my opinion, should be a second medical opinion. Thank you.
So, just for clarification, where would that be? Would that be added in another line? All I see is this removes the line. Is there?
Yes, sir.
Something
You
that
can
needs to be
ignore my
added?
last remark. That's
Okay,
fine.
I just wanted to be clear that we're not looking for another amendment to, okay. Committee discussion on the amendment. Representative Berquist.
And just back to Representative Bryce, the amendment just takes away a statement that it can't be especially true for every patient that they couldn't concur on something they don't have knowledge about. Thank you.
Representative Blex.
And it looks like that's already covered on line 33, where written and informed consent means a written document signed by the patient. So the patient's already given that authority. I don't really see any need for, I think this is taking it out. Am I reading that correctly?
Representative Bryce.
Yes, I believe that's true. Informed consent means you have been informed about the treatment and what might occur with the treatment. The attestation is making the patient say, yes, I'm dying, I know I'm dying, I have scientific knowledge, and be able to prove that I'm dying. It's kind of two different things. And so the informed consent is still there, and I think that's really what's important for the patient. The attestation is asking them to do something they don't have the medical or technical knowledge to be able to be true.
Mr. Chair, may I provide some clarification?
What's that?
May I provide some clarification?
You may.
Thank you. So if you look to the definition of written informed consent, it continues from page 1 to page 2, and it says that includes all of the following. So that's A through G. So this is part of the written informed consent. So in order for the informed consent to be valid, it has to contain currently all these things, including that attestation.
And in layman's terms? Representative Bryce.
Does that mean the amendment is not possible? No, it is possible? Okay.
Representative Bryce, it would just amend that list, so it would just shorten it a bit.
Committee, further discussion on the amendment. Representative Weichel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the Vice Chair, the other amendments you have are not related to the informed consent piece, is that right? Like, one is. So I'm having trouble figuring out, like, all the proposed changes coming if we're only seeing one amendment at a time. Is there a way to have that broader conversation?
Probably. Yeah, we can pass out all the amendments if it's okay with the maker, and we can put it all together. Very good. Thank you for that. And does a second of the motion? Second. Okay. So we're going to get all three amendments. Okay, committee, we're going to start over. Representative Bryce, can you start? Which amendment are we going to start with then?
Yes, Mr. Chair. We went over the attestation amendment. If you pull that one up and we just talked about that, but let's see, it's called consent. It's called consent, I believe, on the, is that the one? Okay, it says consent, and on the second page, B, it says remove language in lines 4 through 7. And that is basically not requiring the patient to have expertise on their prognosis and condition.
Okay, and then let's do on page 2, top of the.
There is a second amendment that if you look on the front, it's SB 250 witness. Turn it over on the back. There's an insertion that says, to Representative Weichel's question, that the person witnessing consent is unrelated to the physician or the business that's marketing the treatment. And that's just to try to have objective and people who don't have other motives involved in witnessing.
And then the third one?
The third one, SB 250, it says estate. If you turn it over on page 3, there's a box says that adds, however, a patient's estate may be held liable for any outstanding debt related to treatment or lack of insurance due to treatment. What that is, at the bill as it's written currently, appears that the liability for that the patient is liable for the expenses, and this liability extends to their estate. If they die during the treatment, their heirs are not liable. And it needs to be clear, this clarifies to the patient, especially before they start treatment, that their entire estate, it could be at risk. It basically gives them information so they can make a better decision, including the financial.
Very good. Committee questions on the amendments. Representative Reeves.
I have a legal question regarding the third amendment on the patient's estate. So if the patient is married, would it be the estate that is jointly held, or is it only what is held with that person as an individual?
Thank you, Mr. Representative. That's a great question, and as the good lawyer, I'll answer, it depends. So it depends how your estate is set up. If you have, let's say, jointly owned property like a house in your name and your spouse's name, that is the estate. So if it's your house, if it's just jointly owned, they could probably take the house. If it's like an insurance, what would you call that? Oh, no, like life insurance, sorry, if you have a life insurance policy, that would not be part of the estate. That would just have your beneficiary. And then if you have a trust, that would be dependent on how the trust is set up.
Another question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A second question, just to follow along with it. So let's say I'm going to go and I'm going to have this treatment done, and I'm told it's going to be 2 weeks from now before I can start the treatment. Couldn't I have all of my estate, will do a power of attorney, everything changed so that it is not under my name, basically? So that nothing is under my name other than like life insurance and that kind of thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, the good lawyer answer, it depends on what the details of that contract would be, whether it would be payable upon receipt, when the debt would attach to you, if it's upon just signing that contract, but most commonly, a debt would attach upon receipt of the services. So,
Okay.
yeah, it would just depend on the contract language.
Okay, thank you.
Committee further discussion. Representative Steens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification on the witness, I know Representative Bryce mentioned the physician, and so I'm just trying to understand, because on this it says who is unaffiliated with the patient, physician, or physician's place. Is there other, I guess, witnesses that could be defined besides another physician?
Representative Bryce.
Thank you. I believe the revisors would know, but would you want to answer? Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the current language of the bill requires that it's attested to by the physician and a witness, and this language would require that the witness is not affiliated with the physician or essentially the physician's office. So it could be anyone who's not. It could be a family member, it could be a notary public, just someone who doesn't work essentially at the place of business.
Thank you.
Committee further discussion on the amendments. Seeing none, Representative Bryce, you may move your amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move my 3 amendments.
Well, Mr. Chair, can we so initially, the one amendment was offered and seconded, and these 2 are distributed, and there was not an additional motion made. So if we could have the motion be amended or substituted to clarify that it's now all three and have the second.
So Representative Bryce needs to make a motion to include all three amendments? Is that what you're saying? Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I edit my amendment to include all three, my motion to include all three amendments. Thank you.
And a second? A second by Representative Ruiz. Okay. Now we're back. Are we all straight now? Okay, very good. Committee, all in favor of the amendments, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Amendments are adopted. Back on the bill. Discussion? Seeing none. Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think with the three amendments, it takes some of the sharp edges off of the bill, but I continue to be opposed to the overall bill. Thank you.
Very good. Committee, further discussion. Representative Orpeza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I currently do not have an amendment available, but I'm hoping if this passes out of committee and potentially goes to the floor, that that amendment would be potentially considered on the floor at a later date.
Committee, further discussion. Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was kind of secretly hoping we would punt this down the road to make it a better bill. I do appreciate Representative Bryce's improvements, but it's not enough to get me across the finish line, so I think I'm still going to have to be a no.
Very good. Further discussion? All in favor of this? I need a motion to Representative Bueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass Senate Bill 250 out favorably as amended.
Motion, do I have a second? Second by Representative Steens. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign? No. Ayes have it. Bill is passed. You may. Who wants their no vote recorded? Representative McDonald. Nobody else? Okay, very good. Thank you, committee, for the spirited discussion on this. My own, for whatever it's worth is, I'm not sure you could write a bill that was tight enough to address all these issues. And if we did, we wouldn't be able to put the paper in this room. But thank you for your hard work. Tomorrow, you know which bills we're working, and I will see you tomorrow. We're adjourned.